wellness as assessment. We'd also will discuss strategies for collective care and resilience. We'll go through and discuss managing stress, burnout, and trauma when it comes to advocacy, as well as creating community support networks. And finally, we'll wrap it up with providing some grounding practices that you can take forth when it comes to your advocacy. We'll then open up the floor for questions and then provide some closing statements. So thank you. Next slide, please. So just to get us started, feel free to come off mute and share or drop it in the chat. But we're just asking a simple question of what's one small thing that you do in your daily routine that helps you feel balanced or recharge? And so since I asked the question, I can go first. So for me, something that helps me, not necessarily on a daily practice, but I try to do this maybe 4 to 5 days a week, is having some sort of movement. I really like lifting weights and playing rugby. So being able to incorporate that to some extent helps me feel more balanced. And I see that people are dropping things in the chat. I see some stretches, morning walks, gardening. Yeah, thank you so much everyone for sharing, drinking tea, going outside. Yeah, and so these are all examples in which, we are being mindful when it comes to how we show up for ourselves and, for our community as well. And part of that is through wellness. And we'll just jump right in. Next slide, please. Just in terms of like, what even is wellness? So wellness is a holistic, strength-based approach, which helps build on individual assets and strengths. It's individually defined based on goals, beliefs, values, culture, personality, and life experiences. So wellness can look differently for every single person, right? As well as every community. So wellness is a continuous and active lifelong process of making individual decisions to live a healthy and fulfilling life. Right? So well-being is a state of being that allows for people to achieve their full potential. So as you know, the question that we posed for the icebreaker, wellness is a day-to-day pursuit of attaining a sense of well-being. And so some of these are some of the examples that you've provided that you incorporated in your own lives can involve physical movement, social connections, mental stimulation, meditation, and sleep and nutrition. So I think oftentimes people think of, right, well-being and wellness, they are interconnected, right? So we have wellness as the process, and then the result would be well-being. So, right, we work through wellness in order to get that individual result of well-being. And there are different modes of wellness, as you can see here. This is the wellness wheel, and it has 8 different components of wellness, which could include anything from your social life, your work life, the environment that you're in, intellectual wellness, as well as spiritual wellness, emotional wellness, physical wellness, and financial wellness. And so we do have an exercise that it could be a personal assessment. Next slide, please. And so this is a readily available personal wellness assessment. You don't need to share it with anyone. I'm going to give people about 5 minutes to go through it. You can take a look. I've dropped it in the link here. And so I'll give folks some time to be able to do it. And it goes through the different dimensions and allows you to do some self-assessment. And so I think, one of the, before opening it up so that y'all can take some time to do the assessment if you're interested, one of the things that it does provide is it provides a score. You could put in some information for the University of New Hampshire, which is where the test is from, if you are so inclined to do so. You don't have to, but you can then look at the different dimensions of your wellness. And if there's one section that you see like, oh, I could work a little bit on, you can then, from those results, start to incorporate a plan. And we could talk about like, well, how do I start developing that plan after the 5 minutes? And then the last thing is that once you have that plan, you can then, revisit, retake it as you need, or, look back and see like, oh, maybe there's other dimensions that I can take on. So, and my suggestion would be, as you take the test, is that you focus on one or two, because it could be overwhelming to do all 8. So I think that that's just kind of like a summary of the personal wellness exam. Please let me know if you're having any issues. And yeah, I'll give y'all some time to take the score. So we'll meet back at 3:17. And we can talk through about what some of the next steps can be for this assessment. Okay, it's been about 5 minutes. How are we doing on time? Has everyone had an opportunity to get through the assessment? Thumbs up if so. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate y'all. Um, and so let's go to the next slide, please. Oh, I'm glad that the tool was interesting, Peggy. I think you know, for like I said, these are for yourself and for self-assessment. Hopefully folks were able to get some insights in terms of the different dimensions of wellness as it comes into your individual lives. Just going to provide some like activities that may be beneficial if some of out of the 8 dimensions that could be of use. Some self activities to try for the emotional and spiritual wellness could be to journal, right? Being able to write down our daily thoughts. And it also helps us to be able to process, right, some of the situations that we may be encountering. The other thing is to talk to someone, whether that's family members, a counselor, whatever that support network might be. Is just similar to journaling, being able to discuss maybe some of the more heavy topics that may be coming through our lives. Evaluating social media habits. This is something we're going to talk about as well a little bit later on, and just seeing like, are we doom scrolling, or are we spending a lot of time on social media? And can we get information maybe in like smaller doses that can't seem overwhelming, that can be less overwhelming. There's also opportunities to meditate as well as to volunteer in order to be able to ground ourselves and also feel a connection to community. For physical, being able to find movement that feels good is going to be really critical. I think that oftentimes there may be a lot of stigma when it comes to like physical activities, and as well as working at Green Latinos, I do personal training, and as one thing that I can suggest on this one in particular is that the movement that you find most gratifying is going to be the one that you're going to be able to sustain, especially if physical wellness is one that you struggle with. So you don't have to be lifting weights in the gym. You could be doing yoga, you could be going on walks, you can be doing ultimate frisbee. There's no one size fits all when it comes to any of these. So because wellness is individual. Eating nutritious meals and snacks, and then creating a nighttime routine. For social, connect with local groups and organizations, and then schedule chats with loved ones, right? Oftentimes we feel really busy, and whether it's for all the advocacy work that we do at our jobs. And so it's important to be able to try to take a little bit of time to schedule those chats. For financial, some of the suggestions are budget plans, setting financial goals and milestones. For occupational and intellectual, constant exploration for career opportunities, and then being able to learn about, how to continue to be a lifelong learner, whether that's through, some sort of certification courses, or, accessing, local library. And some of the sometimes they have like free classes, or other sorts of opportunities that are at low cost, right? And so there's various opportunities in terms of occupational and intellectual wellness, self-care activities. And then the last one is environmental, spending some time outside, and then rearranging your indoor space, which I personally do all the time to just try to fix the assessment. And I don't know, it kind of feels like the inner child when you rearrange your room and you're like, new space, new me. So if any of these self-care activities seem to resonate with you, please take a look. These are also part of the Colorado State University examples that they have. And so these are more tailored towards students, and I've altered them so that they're more generalized. But I think that I'm just dropping a link in the chat as well, so that there's other examples that may be beneficial to pop in. So next slide, please. Okay, so this is for social media here. So I have here a sword, and that's because social media can be a positive and a negative, and very much a double-edged sword when it comes to our, you know, our wellness. So, social media provides a lot of benefits. There's social connections that you may have made even, that wouldn't have been possible without the internet, right? So there's a lot of social connections, and it also helps keep in touch with loved ones who might be far away, and being able to see what they're up to. There's also information sharing. There's a lot of infographics and good information that is shared through social media. And then there's also a way, ways to learn about, any advocacy efforts and being able to engage in those. Next slide, please. So on the other hand, right, on the other edge, we have misinformation and disinformation that can be prevalent in social media. So sometimes it can be hard to gauge, like the the factual baseline of some of these posts. I know for myself, I'm constantly like Googling things to see if it's true. And so one of the ways that you can kind of combat that is that if there's like a strong emotional reaction you have when reading it, there's a probability that that might be, misinformation at play. And so it may be a good idea to be able to try to, find a secondary source of that type of information. There's also the reality that there's cyberbullying and harassment is all too real when it comes to social media. And then the last one, which I've mentioned too, is when you're doom scrolling, which is where you might even feel like almost paralyzed when you're just like going through and just seeing different whatever the topic may be, just going down this rabbit hole on social media. So it's important to be able to understand the pros and cons of social media and understand that like it's not necessarily like good or bad. It's just it's just a tool that we can use in order to be able to stay connected, but also understand the risks that are involved when it comes to social media. Next slide, please. And so particularly when it comes to wellness, there's the wellness industry has been growing about 8.6% every year, and a lot of it is through social media. So people want to know more information, right, about wellness and how they could be able to continue the process to achieve well-being. And so the hashtag wellness has more than 16 billion views on TikTok alone. And so if you decide to peruse that platform, you'll see that there are various trends and subtopics that are involved about wellness, which include morning routines, affirmations, as well as things like hormonal health. But it's important to know that when you're taking health advice from social media, it does come with some risks. And one thing to be wary about are these, virtual challenges or very drastic changes that people may be promoting when it comes to, altering your wellness. So, what science has shown is that small sustainable changes are going to be what's going to be most successful. Right. So like you might see like 30-day challenges for squats, for example, and it's like that might not necessarily lead you to continue to, right? Like if your goal is to go to the gym, to continue to do squats past the 30 days. So what would be helpful in terms of social media is to be able to find inspiration and acknowledge like what fits best in your lifestyle. Next slide, please. So some tips, consulting credible sources that are reputable. So the CDC, the FDA, and the USDA may be some examples of that. And like I said, just be wary of any sort of quick fixes or viral challenges that may happen, especially if they're indicating that they'll help you, make long-term changes in your wellness. So it's important to know that as the definition of wellness says, it takes time and it is a lifelong process. And so we can take immediate steps, but these drastic changes won't help us have these sustainable changes that we may be after. Next slide, please. And so now we're going to shift over to strategies for collective care and resilience, right? So we've been from what we've talked about so far, we've talked about the individual level of wellness, of taking care of the different dimensions of wellness as ourselves, and now what we want to do shift to is we understand that wellness is also part of the collective. As you may have noticed, some of the self-care involves reaching out to other folks. And so now what we want to do is we want to expand it out and talk about some of those strategies that we can incorporate to take care of our community. And so for this session, part of the conversation, I'll hand it over to Juan Madrid, our sustainable communities advocate, to take us through in terms of how we can start to develop these strategies for collective care and resilience.
Great, thank you, Val. And let's go ahead and yes, thank you for advancing, Cumbia. So when we look at strategies for collective care and resilience, we're really looking at a cycle of community care. And so, right, based on the self-assessment that you did, and other information, then it's that cycle. So your needs are expressed, your needs are supported, and then consent received, and then opportunities for reciprocation, right? So we have to build these relationships that are stronger than our institutions, according to Adrienne Marie Brown, right? So this is one way that we can go about doing that, right? A continuous assessment and looking at our collective care needs, both individually and as a community. And so we can go through that cycle, and I'll go ahead and let me see. Oh, I'm not sharing. Cumbia, are you able to drop the notes from slide 13 into the chat?
I don't, because I'm screen sharing a recording. I
Oh, you're
can't
right. Yeah.
exit out.
Maybe if you're, oh, there you go. Thank you, Val. And then, so there's a link to the strategies on how to use what is collective care and how to care for community in crisis that you all can look at at your own time. So then we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. And so strategies for collective care and resilience, that's engaging with your local community. What kind of space exists in your community that provides support? And so that's identifying, right? So I'm in the DC, Virginia area. And so I look at both community that I'm working with towards the environmental goals and kind of my work community and groups I work with there. But then I also we have a 6-month-old, so I'm also with my partner. We look to community that can support us with being new parents, new moms, right? So looking at what resources are available in our community, and then going to those spaces for providing that support. So then we can go to the next slide. And so strategies for collective care and resilience, know what you live for. I read Tony Robbins, kind of what's your why, right? Why are you doing the work you do? What is it that you love to do? So knowing what you live for, understanding what you can contribute to the cause and to the causes you care about, striving for honesty and not for perfection. So I care about mental health and I care about substance use disorder. And so when I'm feeling bogged down with everything that's happening and there's a lot of pressure and I just feel like maybe we're not making a lot of headway, then the things that make me feel good is volunteering with the Arlington Substance Use um, Prevention Center. And I will go out and man the table and hand out the Narcan and literature associated with Narcan. And that gives me that, right? That's knowing what I live for, understanding what I can contribute, and then I'm not being perfect, but then looking for what's around the community that's going to make me feel better. Continuing to divest from white supremacy culture, so not getting caught up in that and falling back on our cultural roots and things that uplift us through that method. Learning to distinguish between conflict, harm, and abuse. Right, conflict could be that disagreement with your coworker, with your partner, family member, friend. Harm could be that physical, mental, or emotional harm. And then abuse is, again, can be that physical, emotional abuse that, so understanding and distinguishing between those. And then number 6, being active, being in an active conversation with what your body needs. So what is being in an active conversation with your body needs mean, right? Listening to other stories is another. And so when we're in a conversation with our body, it's understanding, right? If we're always nervous about giving a presentation, then maybe we're recognizing how our breathing pattern changes. Maybe we're getting that, tingly fingers in our hands because we're getting anxious from the idea that we're going to have to do public speaking, etc. That's being in conversation with your body and then going, oh, I recognize that. What are the things I can do to help alleviate those things? So, like, first is recognizing, oh, I'm always nervous about this. I'm feeling that nervousness. And then listening to other stories can also be helpful. So, next slide. Managing stress, burnout, and trauma and advocacy. So advocacy work is not easy. We all know that. We all experience that. In fact, we can often feel worn down, right? I just explained how when it feels heavy for me after a long week, you start to feel that. It's important to understand symptoms of stress, burnout, and trauma and how they may come to show up in our work. And I think one thing that will it may not always show up right away. When I come to the space with 30 years of healthcare, being a nurse in the ER and the ICU, before I moved into this environmental advocacy work. And I learned that non-accidental childhood trauma, if injured children came into the emergency room, it might not bother me immediately that day, but I started to recognize 2 or 3 days later I would be grumpy, irritable, and have some other signs. And often I didn't know why I was feeling that. And I made the connection to, oh, it was likely that thing. So understanding how that will show up in your work. is important. Once we understand the symptoms, we can begin to take steps to address them. And so, like I said, once I realized, oh, that's probably related to that injured kid that came into the ER, then I was able to recognize that and then be able to address that and take those steps from there. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. So, managing stress, burnout, and trauma and advocacy. What is burnout? Burnout is a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by prolonged or excessive stress, right? So then we read that and we're like, definitely feel, right? They just had the second vote in the Senate on whether to approve or not approve the recommended healthcare changes. And that definitely, the end of the week for me is causing a lot of emotional and mental exhaustion. Following and paying attention to that. So that's what we can call burnout. And then we'll go to the next slide. And we have, we'll go back one. We've got, what is burnout? Burnout, here we go. Yep. What is burnout? A state of emotional, physical exhaustion caused by prolonged or excess stress, what it can look like, right? So in the first image, we have the frenetic subtype. So this is characterized by work overload, usually a high level of dedication, commonly attached to the law of compensation in psychology, meaning an overachievement at work and an underachievement in other areas of our life. So we've spent so much time on our work that the other areas in our life are out of balance. Then the second one, right, the one that's laying on the floor looking kind of bored, under challenged subtype, characterized by an understimulating environment where work tasks are mostly repetitive. Over time, work becomes uninteresting and monotonous. There are no clear avenues for professional growth. And so we can suffer that burnout from there and just kind of not caring. You're just kind of going through the motions. The third image we see is worn out subtype of burnout, also known as neglect burnout. It's characterized by learned helplessness and hopelessness, typically related to unstructured or unclear tasks. The individual adopts a progressively negative approach in the face of potential demanding and stressful work. Right. So we're just kind of worn out, throwing up our hands, and have that give up mentality there. The fourth one, you see two actions. So that's misalignment subtype, characterized by discrepancy between the company's values and personal values and life principles of the individual. Such burnout is often present in jobs that are considered uninspiring for some people. Professional and personal fulfillment are considered conflicting and misaligned. And then we have a link to Psychology Today that talks about these burnout types. So now we'll go to the next slide. So managing stress, burnout, and trauma. We have identifying the type of burnout, self-reflection, discuss our concerns, identify our challenges, and then implement changes. So then, as we advance to the next slide, when we're identifying our challenges, right, major lines of environmental injustice is environmental racism. So we know that Black communities are exposed to 56% more pollution than they produce. Latino communities are exposed to 63% more pollution than they produce, both experiencing injustice in general and racism. And by experiencing those, they impact our mental health. So the connection of psychological health and experiencing environmental injustice is often left out of scientific research and even policymaking processes. And so understanding those, right, that can impact our burnout and our stress as well. And we have another link to the Urban Health Council reports playbook, mental distress of environmental health and injustice, that's going to be dropped into the chat as well. Thank you, Val. All right, and then when we go to the next slide, when we're talking about managing stress, burnout, and trauma and advocacy, we talked about our environmental conditions and the environmental injustices and racism. So when those are addressed, and here we're saying even after air quality or environmental hazards are mitigated, improved, the mental toll of exposure to the injustice may have long-lasting effects. Those effects can be anxiety, depression, PTSD, digestive issues, insomnia, and chronic fatigue. So it's going to take time. And so as Val said, right, wellness is a lifelong process for achieving. And we're constantly trying to achieve that wellness and that balance. So understanding that, right, knowing that, okay, so we're helping to improve these environmental injustices. We know that these other pieces, anxiety, depression, PTSD, those can often linger on. And if we're aware of them, then we can address how we can cope with those. So that leads us to the next slide. Coping with racial trauma, right? Disclosing the experiences of racism, engaging in mindfulness or spiritual practices, practicing self-care, being aware and outlining coping mechanisms for symptoms of racial trauma, such as fatigue, the anxiety, the depression, difficulty sleeping, being aware that those may occur, and then being aware of situations, people, or places that trigger your symptoms of trauma. As I referred, right, I often now, especially now with another newborn, I've got an 18-year-old and a 21-year-old, but I recognize now that if I'm in an environment where I'm being around children that were hurt, I know that's going to impact me. So I'm aware of that. And I can either choose to not be in those situations, or being aware and understanding how I can manage that fatigue, that anxiety, that depression, the sleeping difficulty. And that's where my self-care components can come in, and practicing that mindfulness, doing the daily yoga, which are things that sustain me and allow me to try to achieve kind of that wellness. So then we'll go to the next slide. So then recognizing when you're not able to perform optimally because of the listed symptoms, and the result, and the rest is your rest if you are able, right? So often we're so busy, it's hard to get that rest, right? We're worried about making the next deadline or making the next event. So if we're able to connect with family and friends, we can try to role play how to confront racist encounters or situations. We can try to limit exposure to news media and viral videos so that we're not getting that exposure. And if it's really beyond our capability, we can ask for professional help if needed. And asking for professional help without shame or stigma. We have another link to psychology UGA that we're dropping in the chat on how to cope with racial trauma. And then we can jump into the next slide. So creating community support networks. So we start by asking what support is needed for us or for our communities. If we're looking at community health and our personal and individual health, and we start close to home. So, what do we identify as the individual, and then what do we identify for our family, then for our kind of our work family, and then our neighborhood, and then our larger community. So starting at the center with you, and then identifying new sources of support that are available, offer mutual support to our family members, to our team members, and to our community. That is one that sustains me a lot when I go out and do the volunteering for the substance use group in Arlington. And then being patient and continue to show up. And I think that aligns with that, not striving for perfection, but being honest with where we are, where we're at. And if we're at capacity, letting ourselves know and letting our team members know, letting your family know, being patient with yourselves. Often we're more patient with others. I know as a parent, it was often easier to have more patience with the child and less patience with the partner or with yourself. But being able to show ourselves the same amount of patience and continuing to show up can also help us in creating that community support networks. Then you can also, but with creating community, we encourage you to join our Green Latinos Slack team and to join Green Latinos as a member if you're not already a member. And then you're creating community and connecting with those that are similar and addressing similar challenges. And we can then collectively support each other. And Val dropped in the link for joining the groups. And we'll go to the next slide and we'll talk about grounding techniques that we can do. All right, so grounding practices to take with you into meetings and into protests. There's quite a few of these.
Are you able to open this for me?
Say again. Okay. So box breathing technique, that's a technique I learned in the military. Then there's a superhero pose where you literally kind of stand like a superhero. You're standing upright and tall. Your feet are shoulder width apart. You put your hands on your hips and you're, puffing your chest out, kind of that Superman pose. Studies have shown that that pose will change your breathing pattern. It will inspire confidence. I know many neurosurgeons that will do that pose before they go into their surgery, where they're doing their breathing technique. They're doing the superhero pose. You do that for, a couple of minutes, and that physiologically is changing the body and the mindset. There's the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method, familiar facts, and then worry stones or beaded bracelets. So with the box breathing technique, it's exhale slowly through your mouth for a count of 4, and then you hold your breath again for a count of 4, and then you repeat that cycle several times. So it'd be inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, and then inhale again. And you do that for several cycles, and that will change your breathing pattern. And we have a CO2 carbon dioxide breathing pattern, and so as that builds up, then when we get excited and nervous, we tend to breathe shallow. And so you can get that hyperventilation by doing the box breathing. You help reverse that. We talked about the superhero pose. The 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method is identifying 5 things you can see, 4 things that you can feel, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. And that's a way of slowing your brain down, right? So then you're grounding yourself, because now, right, my toes are feeling the coolness of the tiles I'm sitting on. I can feel the chair that I'm sitting on, right? As my hands are on my knees, I can feel that. So that's a method of, again, grounding ourselves when we're in that heated moment of kind of that flight, fight, or freeze, right? We know we're getting anxious. Those are some techniques we can take with us. If you know you're nervous before you go into meetings or public speaking, right? You can practice some of these. I'm a big fan of that box breathing and the superhero pose. We can go to the next slide and we'll open it up for Q&A now. So anybody that's got a question about anything we've talked about, anything they want to share? Yes, Jennifer Adams, go ahead and come off mute.
Thank you, Juan, for that. I had a question. Thinking about, right, being like, if you're working for a nonprofit organization and thinking about burnout, and right now with funding being limited, or the scarcity of it, how do you convey to funders, or what does Green Latinos do to ensure that we're not overburdening our staff with too much work tying to like the work we're wanting to do with the funding that we're receiving?
That is a great question. Green Latinos, we have put into practice policies to encourage um, taking care of our wellness and our health. And so we're doing that through colectivos. We're doing that through um, meetings like this, where we're doing the advocacy training. We're also within the organization during the summers, the organization from the top down implemented, we do like a half day Fridays, because the bosses recognize the weight of the work. And so during the summertime, we're encouraged, if we can, based on our workload, to take half the day off and go out into nature and be grounded and do some of these things. That's a way, as an organization, that we, for staff, that we're trying to ensure that staff are not overburdened and are able to take that time to practice some of these needs. Jaime, go ahead and come off mute.
Thank you, Juan. That was a great presentation. I was just wondering if there's a website or document somewhere that we can go to find the information you were talking about with those steps you can take with the superhero pose and things like that.
Juan, you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you, Jaime. I believe this slide deck might be available after the encuentro, and it's being recorded. And so we'll be sure to include the speaker notes that talk about the box breathing and the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I will drop the link to staff so that when the recording goes out, we have that the information about the superhero pose, right? The literature that backs up the how and why that is effective.
Thank you.
We do have time for one more question if anyone else has a question. Yeah, thank you, Peggy. We did our best to be able to combine both personal and community wellness, as well as offer opportunities of like examples, right? So if you want to be involved with the Slack and the membership, we do have a membership hub where we share resources when it comes to environmental advocacy, based on our federal and state level priorities. You know, simple fact is you don't have to start from scratch. We have a comunidad and a support network here in terms of that advocacy space. If you're so interested, and hopefully some of these tools set forth is that, you know, if your local community, right, because I know that we are in the virtual space, you know, if you want to start something there, you know, those steps of like processing the needs, seeing who's interested, like will help to start up if you do need to start something from scratch at the local level. So next slide, please. So I just want to thank you all for taking the time to come to our advocacy series about wellness for warriors. Like I mentioned at the top of the hour, we do have more that are going through October, and hope to see you there. If you are interested in connecting with me or Juan, here's our contact information. Please feel free to reach out. You know, we are, even though we don't have a public health or program at Green Latinos, like we do know that this work impacts us in, you know, in a very real way. And so we want to make sure that y'all have the resources and connections needed in order to, you know, for us to continue to do the work, because we can't do the work alone. So thank you so much for taking the time today. And I hope that you guys have a great great start to your weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.